What if I told you that the smartest people are the ones we admire from a distance, the ones whose books we quote, whose minds we envy spend most of their lives alone? No parties, no social climbing, no chasing approval, just silence, thought, and depth. Would you think they're antisocial? Or would you wonder, what do they know about the world that I don't? Why would someone with so much intelligence choose solitude in a world that celebrates connection? This is the question Schopenhauer forces us to confront. Not gently. He breaks it open, and in doing so, he reveals a truth that most people are too afraid to say out loud. Society is often a distraction from self-awareness. It flatters our vanity, fuels our egos, and buries us in endless noise. But solitude strips all that away. It puts you face to face with something most people spend their lives avoiding: your own mind.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
In the first minute of this journey, I want you to imagine something uncomfortable. Imagine waking up alone in a cabin in the mountains. No phone, no internet, no people. Just you and your thoughts for a full week. Sounds peaceful, maybe. But here's the hard part. Most people wouldn't last a day. But why? Why? Dolbeard. Because solitude doesn't just remove others, it removes your identity, the one society reflects back at you. Without the mirror of social interaction, you see yourself not as a role student, worker, friend, but as a being, a consciousness, a mind. And that's terrifying if you've never met yourself before. Schopenhauer believed that most people fear boredom not because there's nothing to do, but because they fear what boredom reveals. And that's exactly why the smartest people, the real thinkers, the ones who dig deeper than dopamine, turn away from the crowd. Not because they hate people, but because they refuse to drown in the shallow end of life. Let's go deeper. Schopenhauer once wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." That's not just poetic, it's surgical. He's saying that society, by its very nature, demands conformity. It pressures you to act how others expect. And the more intelligent you are, the more aware you become of this invisible pressure until it becomes unbearable. Because intelligence isn't just about solving problems. It's about perceiving layers. And the intelligent person sees the layers of social performance, the forced smiles, the shallow conversations, the games of one-upmanship. And at some point they ask, is this all there is? That question is the doorway to solitude. But here's the twist. Solitude isn't freedom from people. It's freedom from illusion. It's the place where you stop consuming and start creating, where you stop performing and start observing, where you stop chasing and start understanding. And for the intelligent person, that understanding is oxygen. It's not optional, it's essential. Let me ask you something personal. When was the last time you were alone, truly alone, and didn't reach for your phone, music, or a screen? When was the last time you sat with your thoughts long enough for them to become something? Or do you constantly run from your own inner world, afraid of what silence might reveal? Because here's the truth Schopenhauer would whisper in your ear if he could: if you can't tolerate solitude, you haven't met your real self yet. You're still a reflection of others, social echo, not a soul. And this is where things get intense. Most people think that connecting with others is where meaning comes from. But Schopenhauer challenges us: what if connection is often just camouflage? What if relationships, for many people, are just a way to avoid the void inside? A way to outsource identity to get feedback from others instead of building an internal compass? That's why solitude is so powerful. It destroys false selves. It burns through ego. It forces you to build meaning from within. That's the dark gift Schopenhauer gives us, not comfort, but clarity. And clarity is the most dangerous thing in the world. Because once you see clearly, you can't unsee. You can't go back to small talk. You can't pretend gossip matters. You can't fake interest in a world obsessed with noise. And yet, here's the beautiful paradox. The more time you spend in solitude, the more real your relationships become. Because you're no longer using people to fill a void. You're showing up as a whole person. A person who doesn't need validation, but chooses connection freely, consciously. That's the Schopenhauer move. You withdraw not to escape, but to sharpen. To refine your soul like a sword. To think without interruption. To feel without distortion. To become someone who can walk into society without being owned by it. But let's not romanticize loneliness. Solitude is not always pleasant. In fact, it's often agonizing. But that agony is necessary. It's the pain of transformation. The pain of seeing yourself naked without roles, without praise, without distraction. And intelligence, real intelligence, is the capacity to endure that pain, to mine it for depth, for wisdom. Now think about this. What if boredom isn't a problem, but a portal? What if feeling bored in solitude is the gateway to creativity, to insight, to breakthroughs you'd never reach while scrolling endlessly through distractions? Schopenhauer would argue that boredom is the shadow of a shallow life, that truly intelligent people are never bored when alone because their minds are rich. Their thoughts are enough. Their inner world is a universe. And if it's not yet, then solitude is how you build it. You don't just escape the world, you construct yourself. And here's something wild. Schopenhauer believed that most people are not really alive in the philosophical sense. They're caught in what he called the will, a blind drive to survive, to consume, to chase pleasure and escape pain. But the intelligent person, through solitude, learns to observe the will rather than obey it. They become conscious, aware, free. That's why the smartest people choose solitude, not because they're cold, but because they're awake. They see the machinery behind the world, the games, the cravings, the herd behavior, and they step out, not to judge, but to understand. And understanding requires space, silence, time. So let me ask you this. If you stripped away everything society gave you, your job, your followers, your friends, your achievements, what would be left? Would you still respect yourself? Would you still know who you are? Would you still have a reason to wake up and think? That's the test of solitude. That's the mirror Schopenhauer holds up to us. And here's the final truth you're not supposed to hear. When you become comfortable in solitude, society becomes optional. You're no longer a hostage to approval. You're no longer controlled by trends. You don't need to be seen to feel real. You are real because you've met yourself in the silence. And that, more than any degree, any job, any social status, is the mark of a truly intelligent life. So far, we've uncovered something that most people spend their whole lives running from. That solitude, far from being a punishment, is the crucible, in which the most brilliant minds forge themselves. But now we're about to go deeper beyond the surface of silence into something even more profound. Because solitude isn't just an escape from society. It's a construction site. A place where the raw materials of your thoughts, your memories, your perceptions, your wounds, your dreams are all gathered together to build something no one else can see, your inner cathedral. Let's pause for a second. What is a cathedral? It's a structure so vast, so intricate, so sacred that it outlives its creators. It takes decades, sometimes centuries, to complete. But once finished, it becomes a place not just of worship, but of reverence, reflection, and awe. That's what your mind becomes when you embrace solitude. A cathedral, but not one made of stone or stained glass, one made of ideas, of self-knowledge, of depth. The average person builds their identity like a stage set. It looks good from the front, but there's nothing behind it, just hollow props. Because their sense of self was sculpted by other people's expectations. They were told who to be, how to think, what to want. And they never questioned it. Why? Because it feels easier to be accepted than to be authentic. But the cost of that acceptance is your soul. Schopenhauer knew this. He wrote that the more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. That's brutal but true. The more intelligent you are, the more you realize that life isn't just about surviving or fitting in or being liked. It's about understanding. And to understand anything deeply, especially yourself, you need solitude. But this is the point where solitude becomes sacred. But think about it. When you're truly alone, there's no one to impress, no one to flatter, no one to perform for. And that means you get to ask the most dangerous question of all: who am I when no one's watching? That question is where your real identity begins. And here's the beauty: once you build that identity in solitude, it becomes unbreakable. Because it wasn't given to you by society, it was discovered by you, in the quiet, in the stillness, in the hours no one else saw. You didn't borrow it, you earned it. Let me ask you something that might sting. Do you know how much of your personality is just a defense mechanism? A mask you crafted to avoid pain, to fit in, to survive in a world that rewards conformity. And if you took that mask off, right now, what would be underneath? Would there be anything? If not, that's not your fault. Society trains us to build outward profiles, resumes brands. But solitude invites us to build inward values, principles, clarity. That's where the cathedral takes shape. Brick by brick, you begin to notice patterns in your thinking. You start to see where your beliefs came from and whether they're even yours. You examine your desires and ask, are these real? Or were they installed in me by advertising, by culture, by fear? That's when the walls of your identity start to rise. And here's something almost no one tells you: solitude doesn't just build strength, it builds originality. Most people's thoughts are recycled. Not because they're lazy, but because they're surrounded by noise. Social media, conversations, news, opinions, it all turns your mind into a mirror, constantly reflecting other people's ideas. But when you unplug, when you detach, your mind stops reflecting and starts creating. You begin to form thoughts that are yours. Ideas that didn't come from a trending topic, insights that weren't borrowed from a guru, and that originality becomes your compass. It gives you direction in a world flooded with distraction. Schopenhauer believed that genius is essentially solitary. That true originality can only arise when the mind is left alone to roam, without interruption, without imitation. And history proves him right. Think of Newton under the apple tree. Think of Nietzsche in the Alps. Think of Beethoven composing in silence after he lost his hearing. Think of Schopenhauer himself writing in near total isolation while the world ignored him until decades later, when minds finally caught up. The point is this: solitude is the birthplace of breakthroughs, but it doesn't happen automatically. You can be alone and still be distracted, and still be empty. That's why conscious solitude, intentional solitude, is so rare. It requires discipline. It requires you to sit with uncomfortable truths, to face your past, to challenge your assumptions. But once you do, something extraordinary happens. You stop needing permission to be yourself. You stop chasing the next trend, the next opinion, the next validation. You realize that peace doesn't come from being understood. It comes from understanding yourself. And that's the paradox, isn't it? The more you understand yourself in solitude, the more you become magnetic in society. People can feel when someone is rooted, when they aren't performing, when they're not trying to impress. That kind of presence is rare, and rare things are respected. So ironically, solitude becomes the path to the most authentic connection. Because you're no longer connecting from insecurity, you're connecting from wholeness, from your cathedral. And that cathedral gives you something else too: resilience. When society tries to shake you, mock you, cancel you, ignore you, you don't collapse. Because your self-worth doesn't live out there. It lives in here. And no one can take that from you. Ask yourself, what would it feel like to walk through the world knowing that no opinion could define you? That no failure could destroy you? That no rejection could shrink you? That's what solitude builds. And here's the final gift Schopenhauer offers us: the realization that solitude isn't a condition. It's a skill. One we can train, one we can practice, one we can master. And once we do, we unlock a kind of freedom that society can't offer because it doesn't understand it. A freedom rooted not in escape, but in essence. Because the person who has built their inner cathedral can walk through any storm, any crowd, any judgment, and remain whole. That is the power of solitude. At this point, we've seen solitude not as a retreat, but as a return to something deeper, more real, more essential. We've explored how the cathedral of identity is built brick by brick through silence, reflection, and the courage to face one's own mind. But there's still one final piece, the most difficult, the most paradoxical, and the most liberating. Once you've built yourself in solitude, how do you return to society without being consumed by it? This is the ultimate test. Because solitude strengthens you, but society tests that strength. And most people, even those who taste the clarity of solitude, eventually fall back into the noise. They re-enter the crowd and forget what they learned. They trade inner peace for social ease. They shrink their depth to fit into shallow rooms. But Schopenhauer, like a philosopher standing on the edge of civilization, offers us a different path, the third path. It's not isolation, it's not immersion, it's transcendence. To live among people without becoming one of them, and to walk through the marketplace of opinions, validation, and vanity and remain untouched. That's the philosopher's freedom, and it's rare, because it requires you to carry solitude within you, not as a physical condition, but as a state of consciousness. Let's be clear, this isn't about arrogance. It's not about thinking you're better than others. It's about knowing who you are so deeply that no one else gets to rewrite you. It's about maintaining internal coherence in a world built on external expectations. It's about being in society but not of it. Schopenhauer believed that most people live reactively. They absorb the moods, values, and beliefs of the crowd. They don't think, they echo. And the more intelligent you are, the more this echo becomes unbearable. You start to feel like an alien walking through a theater of performances, and all you want is realness. But here's the challenge: you still have to live here. You still have to work, connect, communicate. So how do you engage with society without losing your solitude? You become a quiet observer. You stop trying to change people and start studying them. You stop needing to be seen and start seeing everything. You become emotionally self-sufficient. You let go of the need to be understood. And in doing so, you gain something priceless: clarity without bitterness. Because bitterness is what happens when you try to make society what it can never be: deep, honest, awake. But clarity is what happens when you realize society plays its role, and so do you. But your role is not to blend in. It's to remember yourself inside the chaos. Think of it like this: society is the ocean. You're the diver. You can swim in it, explore it, even admire its beauty. But if you forget to come up for air, you drown. Solitude is your oxygen. It's what allows you to go deep without getting lost. And here's the secret most people never learn: you don't need to isolate to stay grounded, you just need to stop outsourcing your center. When your sense of self comes from within, you can move through any environment, any group, any trend, and still remain you. This is what Schopenhauer meant when he said, "The more a man has in himself, the less he will want from other people." Not because he's cold, but because he's complete. He doesn't need to be filled, he overflows. So let's talk practical. How do you live this out? How do you walk through the world as a philosopher, not in robes, but in jeans? Not in a monastery, but in a meeting room. First, choose presence over performance. When you speak, speak from depth. When you listen, listen fully. Don't try to impress. Just express from your center. People will feel the difference. They may not understand it, but they'll respect it. Second, protect your mental diet. Just like you wouldn't eat garbage, don't consume garbage thoughts. Be ruthless about what you allow into your mind. Social media, gossip, sensationalism, these things rot your clarity. Choose books over feeds. Choose silence over noise. Choose depth over distraction. Third, create sacred time. Even 10 minutes a day, where you step away from the world and return to yourself. Meditate, journal, walk without your phone. This isn't just self-care. It's soul maintenance.